So this research journal is about the hidden histories of Jewish and Muslim women working as medical practitioners in medieval Europe. And what was surprising to me is learning about how many of them there were. But also what's even more interesting is not so much that these women were practicing in medieval Europe, but the fact that the Jewish community, the Muslim community, and the Christian community were all, maybe there might be evidence to say they might have been working together actually to some extent. But before I get into the diversity of female healers in medieval Europe, let me set the scene for what it was like for women in general at that time. So surprisingly, women actually had the legal right to practice medicine in medieval Europe. These rights weren't really taken away in any sweeping way until the 14th century. However, all of this came to a sputtering halt with the establishment of universities in medieval Europe. So previous to that, while you could practice, after that, you need to have a university degree, and then after that, a license to practice medicine, which sounds all right, but of course, women were barred from attending university, and that should have been that. But studying history has taught me one thing about human nature, and that's what's written down in official record is aspirational at best. And even when women were legally allowed to practice medicine, the records for them are quite low because the official record would have been for Christian men, and not just Christian men, but Christian men who were either landed and had property or otherwise wealthy, or they were merchants, so they had some merchandise of some kind, or they were of the clergy. Women, like other marginalized groups like Jews and Muslims, didn't get written down in official record, and they operated outside of this official male Christian world. So unless they went the really complicated route of trying to get a license, it's really hard to track down the information on these women. Universities began to be founded throughout Europe in the 15th century. Unlike their practice-based, hands-on, apprentice predecessors, these university-trained physicians would get a very theoretical education. They were studying the classic liberal arts of philosophy, theology, and logic. And these had a strong emphasis on the writers of Galen and Hippocrates. These were ancient Greek scholars who believed that women were inferior to men, both physically and mentally. These newly minted learned physicians would have very little contact with an actual human body, and they did not perform dissection. With the exception of Italy, which I'll talk about in a second, women were barred from attending these institutions, and what men learned there further entrenched this idea that women do not belong in a sphere of learning at all. So let's talk about that Italian exception. The medical school at Salerno admitted women to study medicine. Located just south of Naples, this world-famous, prestigious institution was founded in the 10th century as the first ever dedicated medical school in Europe. In sharp contrast to what was happening in the rest of Europe, Italian women were able to go to university, obtain training, and become physicians, and they held the same rights and responsibilities as men. So this is odd, you might be thinking. So if the seat of the Catholic Church is in Italy, and the Catholic Church isn't too keen on giving freedom to women, then why is it in Italy of all places that women have the most freedoms? Well, it has to do with the way the universities were structured. So in Italian universities, medicine was actually in the Faculty of Arts, whereas theology was a separate department. Italian universities were under control of the Pope, but the Pope really only cared about theological educations. So going to medical school, a woman can kind of slide under the radar. The situation in Spain is a little more difficult to navigate. Regulation for medicine began much earlier there than anywhere else. And in fact, the first legislation started in the year 642. Beginning in the 13th century, Spanish efforts to professionalize medicine became more pronounced. In 1329, Alfonso IV of Valencia introduced stringent regulations. These laws applied directly to women, ruling that no woman may practice medicine or give potions under penalty of being whipped through the town. However, these rulings were issued before the Black Death, which came in 1346, and plague changes everything. There was a shortage of physicians in Spain, just like everywhere else, because everyone else was dead. Because of this, authorities in several countries relaxed their licensing laws, and this allowed women, Jewish, and Muslim healers to practice medicine. In the 15th century, Castilian royalty, most famously Ferdinand and Isabella, always used Jewish physicians. In addition, Jews worked as physicians for many cities of Spain. The fact that Jewish women in Spain were able to be licensed physicians and not just wise women or practitioners of domestic medicine is quite surprising, given the attitude towards women in Spain at the time and their almost non-existent official education. Perhaps it's the fact that they were Jewish that gave them freedom to live outside this really prescriptive, Christian-focused male environment. In general, medicine and law were in the hands of the male Christian dominant society. However, given the shortage of male Christian physicians, women and minorities were allowed to practice up into the 15th century. Although Christian Spain rejected Muslim culture, Morisco medicine was held in high regard. Moriscos are Muslims who were forced to convert to Catholicism. Both male and female Morisco healers treated the upper class and also King Philip II. As time progressed, as one would imagine, Morisco medicine became more and more marginalized. But Jews and Muslims had made their home with Christians in Spain for centuries. And this knowledge does not merely disappear. Despite their erasure and exclusion from the official record, Muslim healers continued to exist and work. in the Spanish countryside. As a rule, their patients were women, and this was often done as a second job. But I say job, but they weren't even always paid for their works. They would do this around other tasks they had, such as going to work, and they would stop on Thursday nights right before their holy day. A considerable contribution to medical knowledge was made by Arab healers throughout medieval Europe, and you could arguably say that most of that knowledge came up through Spain. Spain had a considerable Muslim and Jewish minority population. Jewish physicians, both male and female, made substantial contributions to medieval medicine. They became particularly skilled in treating diseases of the eyes, and eye treatment became their specialty. Another aspect of this is Jews were proficient in many languages. They could read in Arabic, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, and so they were often more educated than their Christian counterparts. And so they were able to translate a wide variety of medical texts. But in spite of all their skills and expertise, the Jews still suffered persecution and were marginalized. Many women in both Arab and Jewish communities practiced medicine, and they didn't confine their practice to within just those communities. So, of course, there have been many studies about gender and women in the medieval era, but most of these have focused on Christian women and the mainstream. And it's not because these historians didn't care. There's actually kind of a practical reason for this. So if you're an English-speaking historian, like myself, and you're reading texts in English, most of the medieval texts that are available to you in English are available from the later medieval period in England. However, here in England, in medieval times, Muslims were quite rare to come across. And after the expulsion of the Jews in 1290, no one really wanted to admit they were Jewish either. So even if there were Jewish people residing, they were not going to go on record and say so. So if we were to focus on England for the site of this study, evidence would be very light on the ground. And that's why we're looking at continental Europe for this. So religious differences, as we all know, sparked countless wars throughout history. And that's sort of the dominant male narrative. What's interesting about the medieval medical historians that I've been researching is they're putting forth the notion that women operated outside of these normal religious boundaries that men operated within. Maybe perhaps with slightly less hostility and with a little more knowledge sharing as opposed to beady stabby. And there's this really excellent 12th century Latin text, and this was written by a Muslim scholar. He was visiting Palermo in Sicily in the year 1184. And he offers us this rare snapshot captured, and it's his first-hand experience seeing how women were behaving on a feast day, which what the feast day he's describing is Christmas. So he says, "The Christian women of this city follow the fashion of Muslim women, are fluent in speech, wrap their cloaks around them, and are veiled. They go forth on this feast day, dressed in robes of gold-embroidered silk, wrapped in elegant cloaks, concealed by colored veils, and shod with gilt slippers. They parade to their churches bearing all the adornments of Muslim women, including jewelry, henna on the fingers, and perfumes." So it appears that in 12th century Palermo, Christian women were looking to their Muslim neighbors as models, as inspiration, and for fashion on a feast day when they wanted to feel their most elegant. And I love this image. And we can see that, at least from this account, there's proof, at least there was some sharing of ideas going on some level. And so much so, there's evidence of respect and emulation. One expert on Sicilian Arabic, he translates the statement that the Christian women are, quote, fluent in speech, as specifically meaning eloquent speakers of Arabic. So they not only were sharing fashion, they were also sharing a language. So could medieval women have been working behind the scenes to share knowledge and culture and healing and celebration when the men around them were only seeking destruction? There isn't enough evidence to say for sure, but it's an intriguing idea. I wrote a blog post about this on my website, blackthornandstone.com, and I'll link to it down in the description. And it has way more detailed information, and it also links to the sources I used for this. If you would like to read more, check it out.